The day the sky cracked open, we didn't know what hit us. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning, and the air smelled like burnt ozone, like a storm was brewing, except there wasn't a cloud in sight. I was hauling cargo crates with Jessa and Malik down at the colony's edge, a dusty little outpost we'd scratched out of Titan's crust. 12 of us were out there, sweating through our suits, laughing about some dumb joke Malik had cracked about the governor's new beard. Then came the sound, a low, guttural hum that rattled your teeth, and before we could even look up, the first beam sliced through the ground like a knife through butter. Jessa went down first, her scream cut short as her suit split open, spilling red across the orange dirt. Malik shoved me behind a crate just as another beam took him, his body folding in half like a rag doll. I didn't see the rest die. I just heard the chaos, shouts, static over the comms, then silence. They came from nowhere, those bastards. Ships like jagged teeth hovering over us, black and gleaming, spitting fire that melted steel and bone alike. 12 of us gone in under a minute. 12 lives snuffed out like they didn't mean a damn thing. I survived because I crawled under a busted crate and held my breath until my lungs burned, watching through a crack as they scanned the wreckage, their drones buzzing like flies over a corpse. I don't know why they didn't finish the job. Maybe they thought we were too small to matter, just ants under their boots. That was their first mistake. Back at the main hab, the news hit like a shockwave. Governor Patel called it an unprovoked attack. Unprovoked? Hell, we didn't even know these things existed until they turned our friends to ash. The survivors, me included, stumbled into the mess hall, faces pale, hands shaking. Someone said they'd picked up a signal just before the strike, a garbled mess of clicks and screeches. Alien. That's what they were calling them. No name, no face, just a word that tasted like bile. The room erupted, people yelling, crying, demanding answers. Patel tried to calm us, his voice steady but his eyes wild. "We're reaching out to Earth," he said. "Fleet Command's been alerted. Help's coming." But I saw the truth in the way his hands gripped the podium. Earth was months away. Help wasn't coming fast enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessa's face, the way it froze mid-scream, or Malik's body crumpling like paper. I kept replaying it, wondering why I'd lived when they hadn't. Guilt gnawed at me, but under it, something hotter was growing. Rage, pure and sharp, like a blade sharpening itself. I wasn't the only one. By morning, whispers were spreading through the colony. People weren't waiting for Earth. They wanted blood. Tanner, our chief mechanic, was already in the hangar, rigging drones with whatever explosives we had left. "They think they can hit us and walk away?" he growled, slamming a wrench against a workbench. "We've got ships, we've got weapons, we've got something they don't, us." He wasn't wrong. Titan wasn't some cushy core world settlement. We were roughnecks, miners, exiles, people who'd fought tooth and nail for every scrap we had. The aliens might have had tech that made our gear look like toys, but we had grit, and we had numbers. The colony had 36 scout ships, patched up relics from the expansion wars, and a couple of freighters we could arm if we stripped them down. Patel tried to shut it down, preaching caution, but the crowd drowned him out. "They killed our people," someone shouted. I think it was Lena, her voice raw from crying over her brother. "What's stopping them from coming back?" That's when I spoke up. I didn't plan to, but the words came anyway, loud and steady, cutting through the noise. "They won't stop. Not unless we make them." Heads turned, eyes locked on me. I wasn't a leader, just a grunt who dodged death by dumb luck. But right then I felt it, the weight of their anger matching mine. "We hit them back," I said. "Hard. We find them, and we make sure they never forget us." The room went quiet, then exploded again, this time with purpose. Tanner grinned, a feral edge to it, and clapped me on the shoulder. "You're damn right, kid. Let's give 'em hell." By noon, we were moving. Techs welding warheads to ship hulls, pilots running sims, everyone pitching in. Patel gave up arguing and started helping, his hands dirty with grease by sundown. We didn't know where the aliens came from, not yet. But we had their signal, and we had a plan. Track it, hunt them, end them. They'd killed a dozen of us. A dozen lives we'd never get back. But we were thousands, and we were pissed. They'd lit the match. Now they'd burn. The next few days were a blur of sweat, steel, and sleepless nights. The hangar became our war room, a mess of sparking welders, clanging tools, and voices shouting over the hum of engines. We didn't have much, just a ragtag fleet of scout ships and freighters patched together with spit and spite. But we made it work. Tanner took charge of the mods, barking orders like a drill sergeant, his hands black with oil as he rigged plasma cutters into makeshift cannons. I stuck close, hauling ammo crates and running diagnostics, anything to keep my mind off the ghosts trailing me. Every time I blinked, I saw Jess's blood soaking the dirt, Malik's body folding under that beam. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was fuel. We cracked the alien signal by the third day. Lena, our comms tech, had been hunched over her console non-stop, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. She'd lost her brother in the attack, and you could hear it in her voice when she called us over. "Got it," she said, slamming a fist on the table. "It's faint, but it's a trail, coordinates bouncing off a relay in the Kuiper Belt. They're out there, hiding." The room went electric. People crowded around, staring at the flickering holomap as it traced a jagged line into the black. Patel rubbed his jaw, muttering something about needing confirmation, but Tanner cut him off. "Confirmation? They killed our people. That's all the proof we need." The plan came together fast. Too fast, maybe, but nobody cared. We'd take every ship we had, follow the signal, and hit them before they could hit us again. Risky didn't even begin to cover it. Our ships weren't built for war. They were prospectors, haulers, relics from a time when humanity thought the stars were ours for the taking. Against whatever those aliens had, sleek, deadly, precise, we were a junkyard armada. But that's what made it us. We didn't win pretty. We won ugly. Launch day hit like a punch. The hangar doors groaned open, revealing Titan's bruised sky, all rust and gray, and one by one, our ships roared to life. I was on the Stalwart, a beat-up freighter Tanner had turned into a battering ram, its hull bristling with jury-rigged guns. He'd named it after his kid sister, lost in some Earthside riot years back. Another ghost riding with us. I strapped into the co-pilot seat, my hands shaky on the controls, while Tanner took the helm, his grin sharp enough to cut glass. "Ready to make some noise, kid?" he asked. I nodded, throat tight. Noise was an understatement. The fleet lifted off in a ragged chorus of engines, 38 ships total, crewed by miners and techs who'd never fired a shot in their lives. Over the comms, voices crackled, nervous laughs, prayers, curses. Lena's ship, the Vindicator, led the way, her signal tracing gear locked on the alien trail. We punched through Titan's Atmo, the G-forces pinning me back, and then we were out, swallowed by the void. Stars glittered like cold eyes, watching us stumble into a fight we didn't fully understand. I kept waiting for doubt to creep in, but it didn't. All I felt was heat, a fire that had been smoldering since the attack, now roaring to life. Hours stretched into a tense, quiet crawl. The Kuiper Belt loomed ahead, a graveyard of ice and rock, perfect for an ambush. Lena's voice broke the silence, sharp and urgent. "Signal's spiking. They're close. Dead ahead. Maybe 2 clicks." My gut twisted. Tanner leaned forward, eyes narrowed, scanning the dark. All ships, weapons hot, he growled into the comms. If it moves, kill it. The fleet answered with a chorus of affirmatives, and I flipped the stalwart's targeting systems online, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then we saw them. Not the ships, not yet, but a shimmer, like heat rising off pavement, warping the stars, cloaked or trying to be. A second later, the shimmer broke, and there they were. 3 alien vessels, sleek and predatory, their hulls glinting like obsidian. Bigger than ours, faster, deadlier. My breath caught, a flicker of fear clawing up my spine, but Tanner didn't flinch. "Lock on," he snapped, and I did, fingers trembling as I synced the guns. The comms erupted, Lena yelling coordinates, Patel ordering a spread formation, someone else just screaming. We fired first. The stalwart's cannons spat plasma in ragged bursts, lighting up the dark, and the fleet followed, a chaotic storm of light and fury. The aliens reacted fast, their ships splitting apart like they'd rehearsed it, beams slicing back at us. One of our scouts, the Drifter, took a hit, exploding in a silent fireball, debris spinning into the void. I cursed, slamming a fist on the console, but Tanner just laughed, wild and unhinged. "That's it, you bastards. Come get us." They did. The lead alien ship swung toward us, its hull pulsing with some kind of energy, and a beam lashed out, grazing the stalwart's flank. The whole ship shuddered, alarms blaring, and I smelled smoke. "Shields holding, barely," I shouted, rerouting power as Tanner banked hard, dodging another shot. Out the viewport, I saw the Vindicator land a hit, a plume of fire blooming on the alien side. Lena whooped over the comms, but it cut short as their second ship fired back, clipping her wing. It was chaos. Raw, messy, brutal. We were outgunned, outmatched, but we kept swinging. Every hit we took fueled the fire, every loss sharpening the edge. They'd killed a dozen of us back on Titan, thinking we'd break. They didn't know us at all. We weren't here to survive. We were here to make them pay. The battle turned into a grinder, a meat slicer of a fight that chewed us up and spat us out. The stalwart rocked under another near miss, the hull groaning like it was begging for mercy, but Tanner didn't let up. He wrestled the controls, banking us hard into a debris cloud from the Drifter's wreck, using the spinning junk as cover. "Keep those guns hot!" he roared, his voice hoarse over the shrieking alarms. I obeyed, fingers slick with sweat as I hammered the targeting array, sending plasma bursts into the void. One caught the tail of the second alien ship, shearing off a chunk of its sleek frame. It spun, trailing sparks, and for a split second, I felt something like hope, until its beams swung back, carving a gash across our port side. The comms were a mess, a tangle of shouts and static. Lena's voice cut through, ragged but alive. "Vindicator's hit. Stabilizers are toast, but we're still in it." Behind her, I heard someone sobbing, a sound that clawed at me. Patel's ship, the Endurance, was calling out targets, trying to herd our fleet into some kind of order, but it was like herding wolves, snarling, bloody, and half mad. Another scout went down, the Prospector, its hull crumpling under a direct hit. I didn't know who was on it, but I felt the loss like a punch, another name to carve into the dirt when this was over. Out the viewport, the alien ships danced. Too fast, too precise, their movements mocking us. They didn't panic, didn't falter, even as we scored hits. It was like fighting machines, not beings, and that made it worse. Machines don't care about the dozen they'd killed on Titan, don't feel the weight of Jess's scream or Malik's last shove. But we did. Every shot we fired carried that weight, every dodge and weave a promise to make them regret it. Tanner saw it, too. I caught the glint in his eye, a mix of fury and something darker, like he was daring them to finish what they'd started. Then the third ship moved. The biggest one, silent until now. It didn't fire. It pulsed, a low thrum that rippled through the void and hit us like a fist. The stalwart's systems flickered, screens glitching, and my stomach lurched as the artificial grav cut out. Tools and debris floated, banging off the walls, and Tanner cursed, slamming a fist on the dash until the backup kicked in. "What the hell was that?" I yelled, wrestling the targeting back online. Lena's voice crackled through, strained. "EMP wave. Half the fleet's dark. We're sitting ducks." She wasn't wrong. I glanced out and saw our ships drifting, engines stuttering, lights winking out. The aliens didn't waste time. Beams lanced through the chaos, picking us off like flies. The Hammer, a bulky freighter, split in half, its crew gone in a heartbeat. I couldn't breathe, the air too thick with smoke and fear, but Tanner just growled, "Not yet," and gunned the stalwart forward straight at the big ship. "Tanner, what?" I started, but he cut me off. "They want to play? We ram the bastards." It was insane, suicidal. But I didn't argue. Maybe because I didn't care anymore, or maybe because I trusted him to pull it off. We barreled through the debris, dodging beams by inches, the hull rattling so hard I thought it'd shake apart. The alien ship loomed, its surface rippling like liquid metal, and I braced, hands clenched on the console. At the last second, Tanner yanked the controls, veering us into a skid that grazed their flank. Our cannons fired point blank, a desperate salvo that tore into their hull, splitting it open in a gout of fire and gas. The shockwave shoved us back, spinning us wild, and I laughed, half crazed, half triumphant, as their ship listed, wounded but not dead. The comms roared back to life, Lena shouting, "Nice shot, you lunatics!" The fleet rallied, those still kicking anyway, and we hit them again, a ragged wave of defiance. The second alien ship faltered, its engines flaring out, and Patel's endurance finished it with a missile volley, a bloom of light that lit up the dark. 2 down. But the first ship, the fast one, slipped away, cloaking again, and that third one, the big bastard, was stabilizing, its hull knitting itself back together like some nightmare. Tanner slumped back, breathing hard, his grin gone. "They're not done," he muttered, wiping blood from a cut on his brow. I nodded, staring at the flickering holomap. The signal was still there, pulsing stronger now, deeper in the belt. "Neither are we," I said, and meant it. We'd lost ships, lost people, too many, but we'd drawn blood. They weren't invincible, and that was enough to keep us going. The fleet regrouped, what was left of it. 22 ships, battered and leaking, but still snarling. Patel came over the comms, his voice steady again. "We've got their attention. Push forward. Follow that signal." No one argued. We'd started this fight on their terms, but we'd ended on ours. They'd underestimated us once. They wouldn't get the chance again. The Kuiper Belt swallowed us whole, a jagged maze of ice and shadow that turned our pursuit into a slow, nerve-shredding hunt. The fleet limped along, 22 ships weaving through the floating graveyard, engines growling against the strain. The stalwart's hull creaked with every turn, patched up with emergency seals that wouldn't hold forever. Tanner kept us steady, his hands white-knuckled on the controls, but I could see the wear in his eyes, cracks in the bravado he'd worn like armor. I felt it too, a heaviness settling in my chest, not just from the fight, but from the quiet that followed. The aliens had gone silent, their surviving ships vanishing into the belt's depths, leaving us chasing ghosts. Lena's signal was our lifeline, a thin thread pulsing through the static. She'd patched the Vindicator's systems enough to keep tracking, her voice a constant over the comms, sharp and frayed. "It's moving. Faster now, heading coreward. They're running." Running. The word stuck in my throat. After what they'd done, Jessa, Malik, the Drifter, the Hammer, They didn't get to run. But it wasn't fear driving them, I realized, watching the holomap flicker. It was strategy. They were luring us, pulling us deeper into their turf, and we were too damn angry to care. Patel tried to rein us in, his voice crackling through the fleet. We need to regroup, reassess. Our losses are too high to keep pushing blind. A few agreed, their ships faltering, but Tanner snorted, cutting the comms mid-sentence. Regroup? While they lick their wounds and come back stronger? No chance. He glanced at me, daring me to argue. I didn't. I couldn't. Every second we waited was a second they got further. A second Jessa's death slipped into something distant, meaningless. We end this, I said, my voice low but firm. He nodded, and that was that. The belt tightened around us, chunks of ice the size of mountains drifting too close, scraping our shields. The stalwart took a hit from a rogue fragment, a dull thud that rattled my teeth, and I patched the breach with a foam gun, cursing under my breath. The fleet was fraying. 2 more ships peeled off, their captains muttering about fuel and damage, but the rest pressed on, a stubborn, battered pack. Lena called out a new reading, her tone spiking. Signals splitting. Multiple sources now converging ahead. It's not just ships. It's something bigger. Bigger. The word hung there, heavy and cold. I leaned over the console, squinting at the map as it resolved. A cluster of signatures, too dense for a fleet, too structured for debris. A station, maybe, or a hive. My gut twisted, a mix of dread and adrenaline, but Tanner just laughed. A dry, bitter sound. Good. More of them to kill. He cranked the throttle, and the stalwart surged forward, the fleet trailing us like a wake. We saw it before we understood it, a shape cutting through the dark, massive and jagged, like a city carved from black glass. It dwarfed us, its surface studded with spires and glowing seams, a fortress floating in the void. The surviving alien ships, the fast one and the big bastard, flanked it, their hulls pulsing in sync with the structure. Drones swarmed out, dozens of them, buzzing like hornets, and the comms lit up with panic. "What the hell is that?" someone yelled. Lena's voice broke through, steady but tight. "It's their base. Has to be. Readings are off the charts. Power levels, EM spikes. They're dug in. Dug in didn't cover it." The first drone wave hit us hard, kamikaze runs that slammed into our shields, bursting in flares of light and shrapnel. The Raven, a scout ship, didn't dodge fast enough. Its hull cracked open, spilling air and bodies into the black. I flinched, hands frozen on the controls, but Tanner was already moving, weaving us through the swarm, cannons blazing. "Focus, kid," he snapped, and I did, locking onto a drone cluster and firing until they scattered into dust. The fleet fought back, ragged but fierce, missiles and plasma carving paths through the drones. Patel's endurance took point, soaking up hits to shield the smaller ships, its hull glowing red from the strain. We pushed closer, the base looming larger, its spires bristling with turrets that hadn't fired yet. That scared me more than the drones. Whatever was waiting, it was holding back, watching us bleed. Lena's ship landed a salvo on the fast alien vessel, crippling its engines, and it drifted, helpless, until the Vindicator finished it with a gut shot. One left, plus the Fortress. Tanner grinned, wild and unhinged, as we closed the gap. They're cornered now, nowhere to run. But I wasn't so sure. The big ship, the one we'd rammed, hovered near the base, its hull still scarred but active, and the Fortress itself pulsed, a slow, deliberate rhythm that felt alive. We'd found them, all right. Their heart, their home. But as the turrets swiveled toward us, lighting up the dark with their first volley, I wondered if we'd bitten off more than we could chew. The Fortress opened fire, and the void turned into a slaughterhouse. Beams thicker than our ships carved through the dark, relentless and precise, tearing into the fleet like a butcher's blade. The Crescent, a patched-up hauler, didn't stand a chance. Its shields buckled, and it burst apart in a silent fireball, debris raining against our hull. I gripped the stalwart's console, my knuckles white, as Tanner yanked us into a dive, dodging a beam that grazed our tail. The ship screamed, metal twisting, and a klaxon blared. Pressure leak, starboard side. "Patch it!" Tanner barked, his voice raw, and I stumbled to the wall, slamming a seal over the crack, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped the gun. The comms were a nightmare. Screams, garbled orders, static swallowing half the fleet's voices. Patel's endurance was still out there, a stubborn bull taking hits and firing back, its cannons pounding the fortress's spires. One snapped off, tumbling into the void, and a cheer went up, ragged but real. Lena's Vindicator darted through the chaos, her crew targeting the drones, thinning their swarm with every pass. But it wasn't enough. The big alien ship, the one we'd scarred, joined the fray, its beams sinking with the fortress. And another scout, the Sparrow, vanished in a blink, leaving nothing but dust. We were dying out here piece by piece, and I felt it, the weight of every loss piling on, threatening to crush me. Jess's face flashed again, Malik's too, and now the Crescent's crew, faceless but ours. I wanted to scream, to hit something, but Tanner's voice cut through the haze. "Eyes up, kid. We're not done." He swung the stalwart toward the fortress, cannons blazing, and I locked onto a turret, firing until it exploded in a shower of sparks. It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in their armor, a dent in their smug, silent arrogance. Lena's voice broke over the comms, breathless. "I'm reading a power surge, core of the base. If we hit it, we might cripple them." Patel latched onto it, his tone steady despite the chaos. "All ships, focus fire on the center, give it everything." The fleet shifted, a wounded beast baring its teeth, and we unloaded. Missiles, plasma, anything we had left. The stalwart's guns overheated, barrels glowing red, and I rerouted power from the shields, praying we wouldn't need them. Explosions bloomed across the fortress, fire licking its black glass, but it didn't break. It shuddered, pulsed harder, and then silence. The turret stopped. The big ship froze, drifting like it had lost its mind. For a heartbeat, I thought we'd done it, cracked their spine. Then the pulse hit. A wave of force that slammed us back, flipping the stalwart end over end. My head cracked against the console, blood hot on my tongue, and Tanner cursed, wrestling the controls as we spun. The fleet scattered, ships tumbling, and the comms went dead, swallowed by a hiss of white noise. When we stabilized, the fortress was still there, glowing brighter, angrier, and the big ship was moving again, slower but alive. "They're rebooting," Lena said, her voice faint over a backup channel. "That surge. It's a reset. We've got a window, but it's closing fast." A window. I wiped blood from my brow, staring at the fortress, its spires glinting like fangs. Tanner didn't hesitate. "Ram it," he said, and I snapped my head toward him. "What?" He glared at me, eyes burning. "We ram the core. Blow it from the inside. End this." My stomach dropped, but I saw it. The logic, the madness, the only play we had left. The fleet was down to 16 ships, half crippled, and the aliens were waking up. We couldn't outgun them, but we could hit them where it hurt. Patel's voice cut in, sharp. "Tanner, stand down. That's suicide." But Tanner killed the comms, his jaw set. "Not if we're fast. Get the charges ready." I stared at him, then nodded, scrambling to the cargo bay. We had mining explosives, crude, heavy, meant for cracking rock, not alien fortresses. I rigged them to a timer, my hand steady now, fueled by something colder than fear. Back in the cockpit, Tanner was already plotting the run, the stalwart's engines whining as he pushed them past Redline. The fleet saw us move and reacted. Some followed, others hesitated, but Patel's Endurance stayed back, covering us with a barrage that lit up the dark. The fortress loomed, its turrets flickering back to life, and a beam clipped our wing, shearing off a chunk of hull. We didn't stop. Tanner aimed us like an arrow, straight at the glowing core, and I braced, the timer ticking in my lap. "For Jessa," I whispered, and Tanner grunted. "For all of them." We hit! The stalwart slammed into the fortress, metal crumpling, and the world turned white. The white faded slow, like waking from a bad dream, but the pain told me I wasn't dreaming. My head throbbed, a dull hammer pounding behind my eyes, and something wet, blood, probably, trickled down my neck. The stalwart was a wreck, its cockpit a twisted cage of sparking wires and shattered glass. I coughed, tasting smoke, and fumbled with my harness, fingers numb as I pried it loose. Tanner was slumped beside me, breathing shallow, a gash across his forehead painting half his face red. "Tanner!" I shook him, my voice hoarse, and he groaned, eyes fluttering open. "Still here, kid," he rasped, forcing a grin that looked more like a grimace. "Did we get him?" I didn't know. The viewport was cracked, showing nothing but dark and static, but the silence was deafening. No alarms, no comms, just the creak of the hull settling. I stumbled to my feet, head spinning, and checked the timer on the charges. It was dead, crushed in the crash, but I'd set it short. 10 seconds. If it had gone off, we'd done something. If it hadn't, we were screwed. "Come on," I said, hauling Tanner up. He winced, clutching his side, but didn't argue as we limped to the airlock. The stalwart was done, hull breached, engines cold, but we weren't. The airlock hissed open, and we stepped into hell. The fortress's core was a cavern of black glass and pulsing light, its walls torn open where we'd punched through. Shards floated in zero-G, glinting like knives, and a faint hum vibrated through the floor, rattling my teeth. The charges had detonated. Half the chamber was a smoking ruin, cables sparking, machinery melted into slag. We'd hit them, all right, but not hard enough. The glow still pulsed, weaker but alive. And in the distance, I saw shapes moving. Drones, or something worse, skittering toward us through the wreckage. Tanner leaned on me, his breath ragged. "Fleet's gotta finish it," he muttered, scanning the dark. I nodded, fumbling with my suit's comms, praying the backup channel worked. Static crackled, then Lena's voice broke through, faint and frantic. "Stalwart, you copy? Anyone alive in there?" Relief hit me like a wave. "Lena, it's us. We're inside. Core's damaged, but not down. You've got to hit it again." A pause, then she swore. "You're insane. Fleet's a mess. 12 ships left, barely holding. Patel's gone quiet." 12. The number sank in, heavy and cold. We'd started with 38, and now we were down to a handful, bleeding out in the void. I pictured Patel's Endurance, that stubborn tank, silent now, and my chest tightened. But Lena was still talking, her voice steel. "We saw the blast, thought you were toast. If you're in there, guide us. Where's the weak spot?" I looked around, squinting through the haze. The pulse came from a massive column, cracked but intact, its base littered with fried circuits. "Center column," I said. "It's the heart. Hit it hard." Tanner coughed, blood flecking his lips, and pointed to a console flickering nearby. "That's their tech. Bet it's linked." I dragged him over, propping him against it, and we pried it open. Alien glyphs glowed, shifting like liquid, but I didn't need to read them. I smashed the panel with a shard of metal, sparks flying, and the hum faltered, just for a second. "Lena, now!" I yelled into the comms. Outside, the fortress shuddered as the fleet unloaded, a distant rumble I felt through the floor. Light flared through the breaches, plasma and missiles hammering the core. The shapes in the dark got closer, tall, thin, moving like spiders on too many legs. Not drones. Aliens. My skin crawled, but I grabbed Tanner's arm, pulling him toward a gap in the wall. "Move!" He stumbled, weaker now, and I half-carried him, my own legs burning. A beam lanced past us, searing the air, and I ducked, shoving us behind a slab of debris. The aliens didn't shout, didn't taunt, just advanced, silent and relentless, their limbs clicking against the glass. I fired my sidearm, a miner's pistol, and one dropped, its body folding in a spray of ichor. Tanner laughed, a wet, broken sound. "Good shot." The fleet's barrage intensified, shaking the chamber, and the column groaned, cracks spidering up its length. The aliens froze, heads swiveling, then scattered, retreating deeper into the fortress. "They're running," I said, hope flickering. Tanner gripped my arm, his eyes fierce despite the blood. "Finish it, kid. For me." I nodded, throat tight, and dragged him toward the breach, aiming for an escape pod we'd spotted. Alien, small, but ours now. The core buckled as we reached it, a final salvo from the Vindicator splitting it open. The hum died, replaced by a shriek of rending metal, and the fortress began to collapse, walls caving in slow motion. I shoved Tanner into the pod, slamming the hatch as the floor gave way. The pod launched, tumbling into the void, and through its tiny port I saw the fortress implode. Spires folding, light snuffing out, the big ship caught in the blast, shredded to nothing. We'd done it. But Tanner wasn't moving. The pod spun wild through the void, a tin can tossed in a storm, and I clung to the straps, my breath fogging the cracked visor of my suit. Tanner was slumped across from me, his chest barely moving, blood pooling under him in 0G, floating like dark jewels. I reached for him, my hands clumsy in the gloves, and pressed them to his side, trying to staunch the flow. "Stay with me, damn it," I muttered, my voice breaking. His eyes flickered, unfocused, but he managed a weak grunt. "Tougher than I look, kid." It was a lie, and we both knew it, but I clung to it anyway, like it could keep him here. Through the pod's port, the fortress was a dying star, collapsing in on itself, a slow, silent explosion of glass and fire that swallowed the last alien ship. The fleet, what was left of it, hovered at the edges, battered silhouettes against the glow. 12 ships, Lena had said. 12 out of 38. The math gnawed at me, a tally of names I couldn't unsee. Jessa, Malik, the Crescent's crew, Patel's silence, and now Tanner, slipping away in this stolen hunk of alien junk. I wanted to feel triumph, to savor the sight of their base crumbling, but all I tasted was ash. The pod's comms crackled, faint at first. Then Lena's voice punched through, sharp with relief. "Stalwart crew, you alive? We've got your beacon. Hang on!" I fumbled with the controls, my fingers slick with Tanner's blood, and rasped back. "It's me." "Tanner's hurt bad. Get us out of here." A pause, then she swore, soft and fierce. "Vindicator's en route. Hold tight." I glanced at Tanner, his face gray under the grime, and whispered, "You hear that?" "They're coming." He didn't answer, just wheezed, a sound that cut deeper than any beam. The wait stretched, seconds bleeding into minutes, and I kept talking. To him, to myself, to the ghosts crowding the pod. "We got 'em, Tanner. Blew their heart out. For Jessa, for Malik, for everyone." My voice cracked, tears burning my eyes, but I didn't stop. "You were right. They didn't know us. Didn't know what we'd do." His hand twitched, fingers brushing mine, and I gripped it hard, like I could anchor him here. The pod jolted as the Vindicator's grapple locked on, towing us in, and I braced, praying we weren't too late. The airlock hissed open, and Lena was there, her suit scorched, her face pale but set. Medics swarmed in behind her, pulling Tanner onto a stretcher, their hands moving fast, too fast, like they knew something I didn't. I stumbled after them, legs numb, and Lena grabbed my arm, steadying me. "You did it," she said, her voice low. "Core's gone, fleet's down, drones are dead. We won." Won. The word felt hollow, echoing in my skull as I watched the medics work, their shouts fading to a dull roar. Tanner's eyes met mine, one last time, and he smirked, faint but real. Then they closed. He was gone by the time we hit the Vindicator's bay. The medics didn't say it. They didn't have to. I stood there, staring at the sheet they'd pulled over him, my hands still red with his blood. Lena put a hand on my shoulder, silent, and I shrugged it off, not ready for comfort. Not yet. Around us, the crew moved slow, faces hollowed out by exhaustion and loss. 12 ships, maybe 100 of us left, out of thousands. We'd wiped the aliens out, ripped their base apart, turned their ambush into a graveyard. But the cost was a knife twisting in my gut. I wandered to the bay's viewport, looking out at the wreckage. The fortress was dust now, drifting in the belt, a tomb for whatever those things had been. No signals, no pulses, just silence. The fleet limped around it, patching hulls, counting the dead. Lena joined me, her arms crossed, staring at the same nothing. "Patel's ship didn't make it," she said finally. "Took a hit covering your run, him and 20 others." I nodded, throat tight. Another name, another debt. "We're not done," I said, the words slipping out before I knew why. Lena frowned, glancing at me. "What's left?" "They're gone." I shook my head, staring at the dark beyond the debris. That was one base, one fleet. They came from somewhere, killed a dozen of us like it was nothing. There's more. She didn't argue, just watched me, her jaw tightening. The fire in me wasn't out. It had dimmed, banked under the weight of it all, but it still burned. For Tanner, for Patel, for the dozen they'd taken first. The Vindicator's engines hummed, turning us back toward Titan, and I stayed there, rooted, the void staring back. The trip back to Titan was a quiet bleed, the Vindicator cutting through the void like a mourner heading to a funeral. The bay was a makeshift morgue, bodies under sheets, too many to count, and the living moved among them, hollow-eyed, patching wounds and ships with the same numb hands. I stayed by the viewport, watching the Kuiper Belt fade into a smudge of ice and shadow, the fortress's grave lost in the black. Lena didn't push me to talk, just lingered nearby, her presence a steady anchor I didn't deserve but needed. The fire in me hadn't died. It coiled tight, waiting, but the weight of what we'd lost pressed down hard, threatening to smother it. We buried Tanner on Titan, or what passed for burial out here. No dirt to dig, just a sealed capsule launched into orbit, his name scratched into the metal with a welder's torch. A dozen of us stood in the hangar, suits on, heads bowed as the pod arced into the sky, a faint streak against the rust-gray clouds. Lena said a few words, short, rough, about his grit, his laugh, but I couldn't speak. My throat locked up, memories of his wild grin and bloody hands choking me silent. He'd gotten us here, pushed us to ram the bastards, and now he was gone. Another ghost riding my shoulder with Jessa and Malik. The colony was a shell when we landed. The attack had gutted it. Craters where the beams hit. Habs cracked open, the air thick with dust and grief. The survivors met us, faces gaunt, asking questions we couldn't answer. "Did you get them?" a woman demanded, her voice sharp with tears. I nodded, forcing the words out. "They're gone. Base is dust." She stared, then turned away, like it didn't matter anymore. Maybe it didn't. We'd wiped them off the map, but the dozen they'd killed stayed dead, and the scars they'd left wouldn't heal with vengeance. Lena took charge, rallying what was left: techs to fix the ships, medics to tend the wounded, me to help her sift through the wreckage of the alien pod we'd escaped in. It was a twisted mess, but its systems hummed, faint and alien, a puzzle we couldn't crack yet. "This is our edge," she said, prying open a panel, her hands steady where mine shook. "They're out there. More of them. We need to know what we're up against." I didn't argue. The signal we'd chased, the fortress, the way they'd fought, it wasn't random. It was a piece of something bigger, a war we'd stumbled into blind. Days blurred into nights, Titan's dim sun barely marking the hours. I worked with Lena, pulling data from the pod, mapping the signal's origin deeper into the black, past the belt, past anything we'd charted. The fleet, what was left, repaired slow, 10 ships now, armed with scavenged alien tech we barely understood. The colony whispered about Earth, about calling for help, but the comms lag was months, and we'd stopped waiting. We'd fought alone, bled alone, and we'd finish it alone if we had to. One night, I stood at the crater where Jessa and Malik died. The dirt still stained dark. The wind howled, kicking up dust, and I clenched my fists, feeling the fire flare again. They'd killed a dozen of us, 12 lives snuffed out like sparks, and we'd answered with a roar that shook the stars. The fortress was gone, their ships shattered, their drones silent, but it wasn't enough. Not while their kind still breathed somewhere out there, plotting, waiting. I'd seen their faces in the core, those spider-limbed things cold and merciless, and I knew they wouldn't stop. Neither would we. Lena found me there, her suit patched, her eyes hard. "Data's decoded," she said. "Coordinates. Another system, 3 jumps out. Could be their home." I turned, meeting her gaze, and saw the same fire mirrored back. "We go," I said, no hesitation. She nodded, a grim smile tugging her lips. "Fleet's ready. We hit them before they hit us again." The Vindicator launched at dawn, 10 ships rising from Titan's dust, a battered spear aimed at the dark. I stood at the helm, Lena beside me, the pod's map glowing on the console, a path to their heart. They'd underestimated us once, thought a dozen dead would break us. They were wrong. We'd wiped their outpost off the map, and now we'd take the rest. For Jessa, for Malik, for Tanner, for every soul they'd dared to touch. Humans don't bend. We burn. The air was thick with dust and desperation, a choking haze that clung to every surface of the settlement like a second skin. Out there, beyond the cracked horizon, the alien overseers watched. Those towering insectoid figures with their clicking mandibles and cold, unblinking eyes. They'd told us it couldn't be done. They'd laughed, if you could call that grating metallic rasp a laugh, when we first dared to speak of it. A tower, we'd said, a spire to pierce the heavens, to claim this forsaken rock as ours, to prove we weren't just the broken remnants of a conquered species. Impossible, they'd hissed through their translators, their voices dripping with disdain. Your kind lacks the strength, the will, the vision. You are ants dreaming of mountains. And for a while, we believed them. For a while, we bowed our heads and scraped by in the shadow of their dominion, our hands bleeding from their labor, our spirits crushed beneath their rule. But then came Elias. Elias, with his wild eyes and his voice like thunder, the kind of man who could make you believe in miracles even when the world was falling apart. He stood in the center of the camp one night, the firelight flickering across his scarred face, and he told us we weren't ants. "We're humans," he roared, slamming a fist into the dirt. "We've built wonders before, pyramids, bridges, cities that touched the stars. They took our planet, but they can't take our soul." The crowd was silent at first, the weight of his words sinking into us like rain into parched earth. Then someone cheered, a ragged, desperate sound, and it spread like wildfire. That was the night it began, the night we decided to defy them. It wasn't easy. God, it was anything but easy. The overseers didn't just mock us, they punished us. They cut our rations, sent their drones to buzz over our heads day and night, their red eyes glowing like demons in the dark. They dragged men and women from their tents, beat them until their screams echoed across the plains, and left them broken as a warning. Abandon this foolishness, they'd say, their voices cold and mechanical. You will die for nothing. And some did. Old Mara, who'd carried water for the builders until her lungs gave out in the dust storms. Little Jessa, crushed under a slab of stone when the rigging snapped. We buried them under the foundations, their graves unmarked but never forgotten, their deaths fueling something raw and unbreakable in us. Elias kept us going. He'd walk the lines, his limp more pronounced with every passing day, his hands cracked and bleeding from hauling rock. They think we're weak, he'd say, his voice hoarse but fierce. Let's show them what weak can do. And so we built. Day after day, under a sun that burned like judgment, we stacked stone on stone, forged steel from scraps, and clawed our way upward. The tower rose, slowly, painfully, a jagged silhouette against the alien sky. It wasn't beautiful, not yet. It was rough, uneven, stained with sweat and blood, but it was ours. Every inch of it screamed defiance, a middle finger to the ones who'd called us nothing. The overseers noticed. How could they not? Their drones circled closer now, their patrols doubled. One night, they came for Elias. I was there, hauling a bucket of water, when their claws closed around his arms. He didn't scream, didn't beg, just stared them down as they dragged him away, his eyes burning with that same fire that had lit us all. "Keep building," he shouted before they silenced him. "Don't you dare stop!" And we didn't. We couldn't. Because if we stopped, it'd mean they were right. It'd mean we were nothing. And we'd die before we let that happen. The camp was quieter after they took Elias, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was something heavier, something coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. We worked harder, faster, our hands moving with a fury that drowned out the ache in our bones. The tower grew taller, its shadow stretching across the cracked earth like a promise, or a threat, depending on who was watching. The overseers didn't bring Elias back, and that gnawed at us. Some whispered he was dead, his body dumped in the wastelands beyond the camp. Others swore they'd heard his voice in the night, carried on the wind, urging us on. I didn't know what to believe, but I saw him in every stone we laid, every beam we raised. He was the heartbeat of this thing, and we weren't about to let it stop beating. Then there was Kalia. She stepped up when no one else would, her voice sharp and steady where Elias's had been wild and raw. She was younger than most of us, barely 20, with a face still soft despite the scars that crisscrossed her arms from years in the mines. But her eyes, those were old, hardened by loss, and lit by a fire that rivaled even Elias's. She'd been his shadow for months, learning from him, challenging him, and now she carried his torch like it was hers all along. "They think they've broken us," she said one dusk, standing atop a pile of rubble, her silhouette framed by the dying sun. "They think taking him ends this. They're wrong." The crowd murmured, some nodding, some staring at her like she was a ghost come to haunt us. "We finished this tower," she went on, "not for him, but for us. For every one of us they've crushed, for every grave we've dug." It wasn't all unity, though. Doubt crept in like rot. Marcus was the loudest, A hulking man with a temper as big as his fists. He'd never liked Elias, called him a dreamer with blood on his hands, and now he turned that venom on Kalia. "This is madness," he bellowed one night, slamming a hammer into the ground so hard it sparked. "We're dying for a pile of rocks. They'll kill us all before it's done." A few nodded, their faces drawn and weary, and I felt the rift forming, a crack in the foundation we'd built with our own sweat. Kalia didn't flinch. She stepped right up to him, her small frame dwarfed by his, and stared him down. "You want to quit? Go. Crawl back to their feet and beg, but don't expect us to follow." Marcus glared, his jaw tight, but he didn't swing. Not yet. He stormed off, and a handful trailed after him, their heads low. The rest of us stayed. The overseers tightened their grip. The drones weren't just watching now, they were attacking. One swooped down during a midday shift, its claws slashing through a rope that sent a slab of stone crashing to the ground. It missed me by inches, the dust choking my lungs as I scrambled back. Two others weren't so lucky. Rico and Sana, pinned beneath the wreckage, their cries cut short. We pulled them out, but it was too late. Kalia knelt by their bodies, her hands trembling as she closed their eyes, and for a moment I thought she'd break. But she stood, wiped the dirt from her face, and pointed to the tower. "They're scared," she said, her voice low and fierce. "That's why they're doing this. They're scared of what we can do." That night, the sky burned. A storm rolled in, not of rain but of fire. Streaks of light tearing through the clouds as the overseers unleashed something new. Explosions rocked the camp, shattering tents, scattering us like rats. I dove behind a pile of steel, my ears ringing, and saw the tower still standing, defiant even as flames licked its base. Kalia was shouting, rallying us, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line!" she screamed. "They won't take it from us!" And as the ground shook and the sky bled red, I realized she was right. They were scared. Because we were still here. Because we were still building. The firestorm didn't stop us, but it left scars. The camp was a ruin by morning. Tents reduced to ash, supplies buried under charred debris. The air stank of smoke and melted steel, and the ground was littered with the wounded, moaning, cursing, or just staring blankly at the sky. The tower loomed above it all, blackened at its base but unbroken, a jagged tooth biting into the dawn. We'd lost 8 that night, their bodies dragged to the edge of the settlement and laid out in a row. No time for graves, not yet. Kalia walked among them, her face a mask of dirt and resolve, muttering names under her breath like a prayer. "They didn't die for nothing," she said, loud enough for us to hear, though it felt like she was convincing herself too. "We keep going." But the overseers weren't done. Their ships came at noon, sleek, angular things that hovered silently above us, casting shadows that swallowed the camp whole. No drones this time, no petty harassment. This was a message. A voice boomed from the lead ship, amplified and distorted, echoing off the rocks. "You have defied us long enough," it said, cold and final. "Cease this rebellion or we will erase you from this world." The words hung there, heavy as the heat, and I saw fear ripple through the crowd. Even Kalia faltered just for a second, her hands clenching into fists. Then the ships opened fire, not at the tower but at us. Beams of light carved through the dirt, vaporizing anything they touched. I saw Terran, the wiry kid who'd hauled cables with a grin, disappear in a flash, leaving nothing but a scorch mark. Screams filled the air as we scattered, diving for cover, clawing at the earth like animals. Kalia didn't run. She stood her ground, shouting orders through the chaos, her voice a lifeline in the madness. "Get to the tower," she yelled. "Use it! Fight back!" I don't know how she stayed so steady. but it pulled us together. We ran, dragging the wounded, shielding each other as the beams rained down. The tower's base was a fortress now, reinforced with scrap and stone, and we piled inside, cramming into the narrow spaces we'd carved out. The walls shook as the ships bombarded us, but they held. Someone, maybe Joran, the old engineer, had rigged a makeshift shield from salvaged alien tech, and it hummed to life, deflecting the worst of the blasts. We weren't helpless anymore. Inside, the air was thick with panic and sweat. Marcus was there, his face twisted with rage, cornered like a trapped beast. "This is your fault," he roared at Kalia, shoving through the crowd to get to her. "You and your damn tower. We're dead because of you." She didn't back down, even as he towered over her. "We're alive because of it," she snapped, her voice cutting like a blade. "You want to blame someone? Blame them!" She jabbed a finger toward the ceiling, toward the ships. Marcus lunged, but hands grabbed him, mine included, holding him back. "Let me go," he snarled, thrashing. "She's killing us!" But Kalia just turned away, barking orders to shore up the defenses, her focus unshaken. Then we heard it. A low, guttural cheer from outside. I risked a look through a crack in the wall and saw them. A dozen figures, ragged and bloodied, charging the ships with whatever they could carry. Pipes, rocks, a few stolen energy rifles. It was suicide, but it was glorious. They hit one of the smaller crafts, swarming it like ants on a carcass, tearing at its hull until it crashed in a plume of fire. The overseers retaliated, cutting them down without mercy, but the damage was done. The camp roared, a sound born of grief and defiance, and I felt it in my chest, a spark that wouldn't die. Kalia was right. They couldn't erase us. Not yet. The crash of that ship lit something in us, a fire that burned hotter than the flames licking the wreckage. We'd drawn blood, alien blood, or whatever passed for it in those cold, mechanical husks. And it felt like a victory, even if it cost us everything else. The camp was a graveyard now, the earth scarred and smoking, bodies strewn like broken dolls. The overseers pulled back their ships after that, retreating to the edges of the horizon. But we knew it wasn't over. They were regrouping, planning something worse, and we were running out of time. The tower was our only shot, our defiance made solid, and we threw ourselves into it with a desperation that bordered on madness. Kalia was everywhere, her voice hoarse but unrelenting, driving us forward. She climbed the scaffolding herself, hauling cables and barking at us to move faster, her hands raw and bleeding. "Higher," she kept saying, like it was a mantra. "We go higher. They won't reach us there." I didn't know if she believed it, or if she just needed us to, but it worked. We stacked steel and stone, welded beams under the searing sun, our bodies pushed past breaking. The tower stretched upward, a crooked, impossible thing, its peak lost in the haze. It wasn't just a structure anymore, it was us. Every ounce of our rage and hope poured into it, a monument to the ones we'd lost. But the cracks were showing, and not just in the tower. Marcus hadn't let it go. He'd simmered since the fight in the bunker, his anger festering like a wound, and now he was a storm waiting to break. I caught him muttering with a few others, hard men, bitter men, near the edge of the camp, their eyes darting toward Kalia. "She's lost it," he said, loud enough for me to hear, his voice thick with venom. "Dragging us to our deaths for her pride. Elias was bad enough, but her, she's a damn tyrant." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but there was a part of me, a small, tired part, that wondered. We were dying out here, piece by piece, and for what? A tower they'd probably blast to rubble the second it was done? It came to a head that night. The air was still, the kind of quiet that presses down on you, and we were gathered around a pitiful fire, sharing the last of the rations. Marcus stood up, slow and deliberate, and pointed at Kalia. "You're done," he said, his voice carrying over the crackle of the flames. "We're not following you anymore. This ends now." The crowd shifted, uneasy, some nodding, others clutching their tools like weapons. Kalia didn't flinch. She set down her cup and faced him, her eyes blazing. "You want to stop? Fine. Walk away. But don't pretend you're saving anyone, you're just scared." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound, and stepped closer. "Scared? Look around, girl. We're dead already. You're the one clinging to a ghost." He swung then, a fist aimed at her jaw, but she ducked, quick as a shadow, and drove her knee into his gut. He doubled over, gasping, and the camp erupted, shouts, shoves, a chaos of loyalties splitting us apart. I grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him back, while others held Kalia, her chest heaving. "Enough!" I yelled, my voice raw. "We're killing ourselves faster than they can!" The fight drained out of them, but the damage was done. Marcus spat blood into the dirt and walked off, half a dozen following him into the dark. Kalia watched them go, her face unreadable, then turned back to the fire. "We finish it," she said, quieter now, but no less certain. For the ones who stayed. Above us, the tower loomed, silent and waiting, as the first lights of the Overseer's ships blinked back into view on the horizon. They were coming, and we weren't ready. The lights on the horizon grew brighter, a swarm of stars that promised death. We could hear them now, a low hum that vibrated through the ground, rattling the loose stones at the tower's base. It was a sound that sank into your bones, a reminder of how small we were, how fragile. But Kalia wouldn't let us feel it. She was up before dawn, her voice cutting through the haze, rallying us like a general on the brink of a last stand. "They're coming for us," she said, standing on a rusted crate, her silhouette sharp against the gray sky. "They think they've won. Let's prove them wrong one more time." Her words weren't loud, not like Elias's had been, but they hit harder, sinking deep into the hollows where fear lived. We moved, slowly at first, then with purpose, hauling the last of our materials, climbing the tower's jagged frame, our hands trembling but steady. The work was brutal. The higher we went, the thinner the air got, the wind tearing at us like it wanted us gone. Ropes snapped, tools slipped, and every step felt like a gamble with gravity. I saw Lena, a wiry woman with a limp, lose her grip on a beam and fall, 30 feet straight down, her scream swallowed by the gusts. We didn't stop to mourn. Couldn't. We tied her scarf to the scaffold where she'd stood, a scrap of red flapping like a wound, and kept going. Kalia was up there with us, her face streaked with sweat and grime, pulling cables twice her weight. "Almost there," she panted, her eyes fixed on the peak. "We're almost there." But Marcus was still out there, a shadow on the edge of everything. He and his crew hadn't left the camp. They'd set up near the old water tanks, watching us, waiting. I caught glimpses of them through the dust, their figures hunched and bitter, and I wondered what they were planning. It didn't take long to find out. Midday, when the sun was a hammer beating us down, they struck. A group of them, Marcus at the front, his face twisted with rage, charged the tower's base, swinging hammers and pipes. "Tear it down!" he roared, his voice carrying over the wind. "End this madness before it ends us." They hit the supports, metal clanging against metal, sparks flying as the structure shuddered. Panic ripped through us. "Hold them off!" Kalia shouted, sliding down a rope so fast it burned her hands. I followed, my heart pounding, grabbing a length of rebar as a weapon. The camp dissolved into chaos, us against them, humans against humans, all while the Overseer's hum grew louder. I swung at a man I'd once shared bread with, his eyes wild as he tried to smash a pillar. Kalia tackled Marcus, the two of them rolling in the dirt, fists flying. "You're killing us!" he snarled, pinning her down. She spat in his face and kicked free, scrambling to her feet. "You're the one giving up!" she fired back, her voice breaking. The tower groaned, a deep, wounded sound, and for a moment I thought it'd fall. But Jorn and his crew had reinforced it too well. Those old scavengers knew their craft. The supports held, barely, and we drove Marcus's group back, bloodied and cursing, to the edge of the camp. They retreated, but the cost was high. 3 of ours dead, a dozen hurt, and the tower scarred but standing. Kalia stood over the mess, breathing hard, her hands dripping red. "We don't stop," she said, more to herself than us. "Not now." Then the sky darkened. The overseers were here, ships descending like vultures, their weapons glowing hot. They didn't fire, not yet. They hovered, silent and massive, waiting for us to break. And up above, the tower's peak glinted, so close we could taste it, a defiance they couldn't ignore. The ships hung there, blotting out the sky, their shadows swallowing us whole. The hum was deafening now, a pulse that shook the earth and rattled the tower's frame, sending dust cascading from its heights. We stood beneath it, a ragged line of survivors, our hands still raw from the fight with Marcus, our eyes fixed on the enemy above. Kalia was in the center, her stance wide, her face a mask of defiance despite the blood crusting her lip. "They're here to finish it," she said, her voice steady even as the wind whipped her hair into a tangle. "But we're not done yet. Not until that peak's crowned." She pointed upward to the jagged tip of the tower, so close now we could see the stars through its gaps. It was a crazy dream, a human dream, and it was all we had left. We climbed. There was no time for rest, no time for doubt, just the raw animal need to finish what we'd started. The overseers watched, their ships eerily still, as if savoring the moment before the kill. I hauled a final beam with Kalia, my muscles screaming, my lungs burning in the thin air. Others followed, Joran with his scavenged tools, Mira with her one good arm, a dozen more too stubborn to die. The wind howled, threatening to rip us off, but we clung to the scaffold, hammering, welding, tying off ropes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The tower swayed, a living thing under our weight, and I heard someone praying below, a faint, desperate sound lost in the chaos. Then they fired. The first beam lanced through the air, white-hot and silent, shearing off a chunk of the tower's midsection. The structure buckled, metal screeching as it twisted, and 2 fell, screaming shadows plummeting into the dark. I grabbed a strut, my stomach lurching, and saw Kalia hanging from a rope, her legs dangling over nothing. "Keep going!" she yelled, hauling herself up, her voice a lifeline. Another blast hit, closer this time, vaporizing a platform I'd stood on minutes before. The camp below erupted in flames, the last of our shelters gone. But we didn't look back. We couldn't. The peak was right there, 10 feet, 5, then inches, and we threw everything into it. Joran slammed the final piece into place, a crude spire of twisted steel, and we lashed it down as the tower shook again. "It's done," he shouted, his voice cracking with triumph, and for a moment we just stared at it, a ugly, beautiful thing piercing the sky, a human mark on a world that wasn't ours. Then the overseers answered. A barrage rained down, beams slicing through the air, tearing into the tower's base. The whole thing tilted, a slow, sickening lean, and I thought we'd lost it all. But it held, just barely, its roots deep in the earth we'd bled for. Kalia laughed, a wild, broken sound, and raised her fists to the ships. "You see that?" she screamed. "You see what we did? You can't take it!" The words were madness, but they lit us up, and we roared with her, a primal howl that drowned out the hum. The ships shifted, their weapons powering up, and I braced for the end. But then, movement below. Marcus. He was back, his crew with him, not to fight us this time but them. They charged the nearest ship, hurling salvaged explosives, their shouts mingling with ours. One detonated, a bloom of fire against the hull, and the craft wobbled, listing to one side. The overseers hesitated. For the first time, they hesitated, their formation breaking as Marcus's attack threw them off. Kalia grabbed my arm, her eyes blazing. "They're rattled," she said, breathless. "We've got a chance." And as the tower stood, battered but unbroken, I believed her. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were fighting. The air crackled with tension as the overseers' ships faltered, their perfect lines fracturing under Marcus's reckless assault. Down below, he and his crew moved like wolves, darting through the wreckage of the camp, lobbing every scrap of explosive they'd scavenged. Another blast rocked a smaller craft, sending it spiraling into the dirt with a thunderous crash that shook the tower beneath us. We cheered, a ragged, desperate sound, clinging to the scaffold as the wind howled and the structure groaned. Kalia's eyes were wild, her grip on my arm tight enough to bruise. "They're not invincible," she said, her voice trembling with something like awe. "We can hurt them." But the overseers weren't finished. The lead ship, massive, gleaming, a god among insects, swung forward, its hull pulsing with a sickly green light. A beam erupted from it, not wild like the others, but precise, carving a trench through the camp that swallowed Marcus's crew in a heartbeat. The explosion was blinding, the heat washing over us even at this height, and when the dust cleared, there was nothing left, just a smoking scar where they'd stood. I felt the loss like a punch, my breath catching as I searched for Marcus's hulking shape. But he was gone. They all were. Kalia's face tightened, her jaw clenching, but she didn't falter. "They bought us time," she said, her voice low and fierce. "We use it." We scrambled, turning the tower into a weapon. Joran rigged what was left of his scavenged tech, wires, power cells, anything that could spark, into a crude transmitter, its signal aimed at the ships. "If we can jam their comms," he muttered, his hands shaking as he worked. "They'll be blind." Mira and I hauled up the last of the energy rifles, stolen from downed drones, and perched them on the scaffold, aiming for the glowing weak spots we'd seen in the crashed craft. The tower swayed, its base crumbling under the onslaught, but we held our ground. Every shot we fired was a prayer, every hit a miracle. One ship shuddered, its lights flickering, and veered off, smoking. The overseers struck back harder. A barrage slammed into the tower, shearing off a whole section of the upper frame. I ducked as steel rained down, my ears ringing, and saw Mira vanish in the blast, her rifle clattering to the platform, her scream cut short. Joran grabbed me, pulling me back as the structure tilted again, a sickening lurch that nearly threw us all off. "We can't take much more," he shouted, his face streaked with soot. Kalia nodded, her eyes scanning the chaos below, then up at the spire. "We don't need to," she said. "We just need them to see." She climbed higher, past the wreckage, to the very peak, alone, exposed, a target in the storm. I yelled for her to stop, but she didn't hear, or didn't care. She reached the top and raised her arms, a silhouette against the burning sky, the tower trembling beneath her. "Look at us!" she screamed, her voice raw, carrying over the wind and the hum. "You said it was impossible. You said we were nothing. Look at us now!" It was insane, suicidal, but it was everything we'd fought for. A cry that echoed through the camp's ruins, through the graves we'd dug, through the years of their rule. The ships paused, just for a heartbeat, their weapons stilled. I don't know if they understood her words, or if they just saw the tower, battered, leaning but standing, and felt something shift. Then the lead ship fired again, a beam aimed straight at her. I lunged, too late, as the light swallowed the peak. The tower bucked, a section collapsing, and Kalia was gone, lost in the fire and smoke. I screamed her name, my voice breaking, but the wind took it. Below, the camp was silent, the fight draining out of us. But the tower didn't fall. Not yet. And neither did we. The tower was dying. Its frame creaked and shuddered, steel bending under the weight of the Overseer's final assault, the peak smoldering where Kalia had stood. I clung to a twisted beam, my hands slick with sweat and blood, my chest hollowed out by her loss. Below, the camp was a wasteland, fires guttering out, bodies buried in ash, the last of us scattered like ghosts. The ships loomed closer, their hum a death knell, their lights bathing us in a cold, unfeeling glow. We'd pushed them, hurt them, made them bleed, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I could feel the end coming, a weight pressing down, and part of me wanted to let go, to fall with the tower and be done. But Kalia's voice echoed in my head, fierce and unbroken. Look at us now. She'd given everything for this, and I couldn't let it end in silence. I scrambled down, my boots slipping on the warped metal, and found Joran hunched over his transmitter, still alive, still fighting. His hands were burned, his face gaunt, but his eyes burned with the same fire we'd all carried. "It's working," he rasped, nodding at the flickering signal. "Their comms are scrambled. They're confused." I grabbed his shoulder, pulling him up. "Then we hit them harder," I said, my voice rough with grief and rage. "For her, for all of them." He nodded, and we moved, gathering the survivors, the handful of us too stubborn to break. We had rifles, explosives, a few drones we'd salvaged and turned against their makers. The tower was our backbone, its height our vantage, and we'd make them pay for every inch they took. The fight was chaos. We fired from the scaffold, beams and bullets streaking through the smoke, targeting the ship's glowing cores. One exploded in a shower of sparks, crashing into another and sending them both spiraling down. The Overseers retaliated, their weapons tearing into the tower's base, and I felt it give. A slow, inevitable collapse, starting deep in its roots. "Hold on!" I shouted, as the structure tilted, throwing us against the frame. Joran rigged the last explosive, a massive charge we'd meant for the peak, and hurled it at the lead ship. It detonated mid-air, a fireball that rocked the sky, and the ship listed, its hull cracking open like an egg. That was the tipping point. The Overseers faltered, their formation breaking, and for the first time, they retreated, ships peeling off, vanishing into the haze. We watched, breathless as the hum faded, leaving only the wind and the groan of the tower. It was leaning hard now, too damaged to stand, and we slid down its crumbling sides, hitting the ground as it gave way. The crash was deafening, a plume of dust and steel rising like a shroud, and when it settled, the tower was gone. Just a heap of twisted wreckage, its spire buried in the earth. We stood there, battered and bleeding, staring at the ruin. It should have felt like failure, but it didn't. We'd built it, we'd finished it, and they'd run. Joran clapped my back, a tired grin splitting his face. "They said it was impossible," he said, echoing Elias's old fire. "We showed 'em." I nodded, my throat tight, picturing Kalia at the peak, her arms raised, her voice defying the stars. The camp was lost, most of us were gone, but the Overseers would never forget. Neither would we. Days later, word spread. Other settlements, other humans, rising up, inspired by a tower they'd never seen but felt in their bones. The Overseers tightened their grip, but it was too late. We'd planted a seed, watered it with blood, and it was growing. They'd called us ants, we'd built a mountain, and we'd do it again.